Welcome to the Ask a Specialist workshop today, and today's topic will be vision and development in infant and toddlers. What to look for, how vision develops in infant and toddlers, and then what to do if there are concerns. We started in Los Alamos County 50 years ago. We work with families in 4 counties: Taos County, Santa Fe County, Los Alamos County, and Rio Arriba County. All of our services for families are free of charge, regardless of income. And thanks to the funding that we received from Los Alamos County, we've been able to expand and grow our services in Los Alamos. So we opened up a new site on Nugget Street in Los Alamos. So currently we are working on getting that set up and opened to the public. So that's kind of exciting for us as well. So I'm Ann Davidson Martinez, and I'm the Family, Infant, and Toddler Program Director, and I'm your host today. And I'd like to introduce both Amber Ohlinger and Sarah Langley from the New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, who will be our main presenters today. So I'm going to allow them the opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we can sort of launch into the presentation. And if something occurs to you after the presentation, or if you have a question afterwards, you can visit our Ask a Specialist website, and you can enter your question there, and somebody will get back to you as well. So there's lots of ways to reach out to us. I'll let Amber and Sarah introduce themselves.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm Amber Ohlinger, and I work with the New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and I'm working with the Birth to 3 program. So we're out in the community, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the presentation. I've been working in early intervention for altogether probably at least 13 years, kind of split up. I've been the director of a program and really know the ins and outs of early intervention, and now I'm really able to focus and think about these kiddos that we serve that have visual impairments or blindness, and how to best support them and their families so that they can have the best start, despite their differences or their challenges, and really able to focus on their strengths and just be creative with families about what we can do to move forward. So, and Sarah's my co-worker.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for having me. So I've been at NMSBVI for about 6 years. And before that, I was at New Vistas, which is another early intervention program in Santa Fe County, like Las Cumbres. And so I was there for about 8 years or so. And before that, my educational background was I got my master's degree in child life. So I did my internships in the hospitals in the Bay Area at Oakland Children's and in San Francisco. So that's sort of my background. But anyway, vision is, I didn't know much about vision when I started at NMSBVI and went to school. They sent me to NMSU, and so it's been a big learning curve, but it's been amazing, and it's fascinating, and I really I love continuing to learn. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share what I know and also to continue on this path. So thank you.
Thank you guys, and thanks for joining us today. So I'll turn it over to you to get going on your
screen. We kind of already introduced ourselves. And this slide, those little blue blobs are kind of representative of everybody who's working for the Birth to 3 program at NMSBVI. So we're covering the whole state. There's 18 of us. You can see there's a concentration in the Albuquerque, Bernalillo metro area, because obviously the population is bigger there. But we go everywhere. That's kind of more or less where we live or areas where we're covering, but we're covering every county. Amber, you want to talk about the program?
Sure. So I just wanted to kind of give a little overview about what the New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired offers. So like we've mentioned, we work specifically with the Birth to 3 program. We work really closely with FIT and follow a lot of those guidelines in terms of how we provide services in the home and the community. And like Sarah said, we're all over the state. So Sarah and I, we really serve this middle, northeast corner, the whole region, and we're all over the place. But no matter where a child lives in the state, they can get these services. So I think that's really important. There's also the outreach program, which is the school age, so 3 to 21, 22, in which when kids are placed in their homeschool districts and they have a visual impairment, they're probably getting what we call TVI, teacher of the visually impaired itinerant services in the public school settings. But there is also this option for some support from NMS BVI for those kids, and that's what the outreach program does. And then there's a specific program in Albuquerque that was created, gosh, I think in I wish I would have written that down. I don't have it. But, you know, several years after the original residential school was created, they created an early childhood program, which serves kids preschool through kindergarten in the Albuquerque area. And that's kind of where we work under a little bit too. We work really closely with them. And then there's the residential school, which was founded in 1903. So it's been around for quite some time. And it's, you know, there's been lots of changes in terms of how they've extended the way services are provided to students, but any students from the state, when it's appropriate, they can go to the residential school and get really intensive educational supports for their visual impairment. So it's kind of a general idea of some of the programs. And then the next slide, Sarah. And these are some of the other additional type of things that are offered by NMS BVI. So there's low vision clinics where kids with low vision can go in and really get a really comprehensive assessment for which types of assistive technology might be appropriate, or you know, whether a monocular is appropriate and what strength, and really looking at all of the details of how to best support that student in using their vision when it's considered low. There's summer programs, summer camps. Of course, right now with COVID, that might look different. I know that last summer, probably this summer too, they're doing more like Zoom kind of opportunities. But in normal times, there's these really amazing opportunities for kids from all over the state to come together and get some really specific experiences to support them. There are short-term programs, and what that is talking about is, so maybe a child lives in Taos, and it doesn't really seem like the appropriate fit for them to go down to Alamogordo to the residential school. It might be determined by the team that going for a couple of weeks for like kind of really intensive orientation and mobility, or working on Braille or whatever it might be. So they might just go short term. So they're not going for a school year, but they're going for a short period of time. And then there's the Instructional Resource Center, which is, every state has something like this. And what it is it's a place where resources and materials, whether it's light tables or Braille books or large print, all of these things are housed. And across the state, we have access for all students that have a visual impairment or blindness to have these materials to support them in their educational experience. Even with our babies, we can get in there and we can order them slant boards or light tables or different materials, switches, things like that. And then there's assistive technology support. So what that is looking at is there's people that are dedicated to outreach across the state to do assistive technology consults and evaluations and determine what might be most appropriate for an individual child, and what, you know, then they can kind of work with the IRC, figure out which materials can be lent or borrowed for 30 days to figure out if it's the right fit, all of those things. So all of this is housed out of the School for the Blind, but the intention is that it supports the whole state. Anything else, Sarah?
No, I think that was great. I think that covered it. So just kind of looking at specifically what we do. So we do what's called a functional vision evaluation. And so basically that's looking at, we're evaluating and assessing a child's functional vision skills. And in that evaluation, we're looking at a learning media assessment. So we're looking at what is the primary way this child is getting information. So which sensory channel? Is it through their touch, sense of touch? Is it through audition, or is it through vision? And of course, if touch is one of the main ways that they're getting information, then we'll look at establishing the need for Braille instruction. There's the orientation mobility evaluation. And Amber, do you want to talk about that a little bit, about what you do in terms of O&M?
So with the orientation and mobility evaluation, we're looking at all kinds of different things when we're thinking about how a child is understanding where they are in space, you know, knowing where they want to go from point A to point B, and then how they're doing that safely and efficiently. So that's really kind of like the broad umbrella of orientation and mobility when a child has a visual impairment. So we look at all kinds of different skills in terms of, again, kind of like Sarah was mentioning, like how are they using their audition to understand where they are in space? How is their mobility? Is a cane going to be appropriate, or some other device such as an AMD? We'll talk a little bit more about that. We have some images. And then it really helps us to know what level of support this child needs to be able to move safely. And then with the babies that we work with, particularly when babies have, well, all babies, but also the babies that have multiple impairments, we can really start talking about just purposeful movement. So of course, kids are going to start to learn to move, but when they don't have vision, we have to really be intentional about helping them understand the concepts of things in their environment and how they can use their body to get to that, to play, or to get to their parent if they want to engage with them, all of those kinds of things. So this idea of safe, efficient movement, purposeful movement, and then understanding where kids are in space and learning how to get from point A to point B safely.
Great. So then, yeah, and so then, you know, basically we're really working alongside with, for example, these EI agencies like Las Cumbres, and we're part of the team. We're supporting the parents with any needs they need, going to an eye doctor, just supporting the families with that kind of diagnosis. And so, you know, we're definitely like partnering with the community agencies in supporting these families. So this is just a short clip of the visual system. And I appreciated it because it's actually watercolors. So I thought it was a very clever way of describing what the visual system is. So I'll just go ahead and get that started. It's about 5 minutes. Oops.
We begin our journey with the eye, specifically the iris, which gives the eye its distinctive color. Now the iris can be green, or blue, or brown, or even black, depending on the level of melanin which it contains. When the lights go off, the muscles connected to the iris contract, which makes the dark circle in the center of the eye, the pupil, get bigger. When the light goes on, the pupil gets smaller to allow less light to enter. This is how the eye adapts to light. Ah, that must be Ellie. She'll be our tour guide on this journey through the visual system. Hi, Ellie. How are you? To get a better look at the visual system, we'll need some light. Let's observe the anatomy of the eye in a little bit more detail. If we peel away the skin, we can see the arteries and veins which supply important nutrients to the area. Next, we can see the surrounding muscles, which help move the eye in all directions. Now let's cut the eye in half to see how light enters the visual system. First, it hits the cornea, the protective layer of the eye. Then through the hole in the iris known as the pupil. Lastly, the job of the lens is to bend light to focus it correctly on the retina. It's time to enter the eye. Ellie has her jetpack, and now we're looking at the surface of the inside of the eye. The optic nerve on the right is where all the nerve fibers leave the eye heading toward the brain. Let's follow Ellie as she heads towards that dark spot in the distance. This is the fovea centralis, a small pit in the retina responsible for our sharpest, clearest vision. Foveal vision allows us to do things like read books or drive cars or play video games. Now let's look at a cross-section of the retina to see how neurons respond to light. Light is absorbed by the rods and cones, which are specialized photoreceptors. This starts a chain reaction, which excites the bipolar cells, and then subsequently the ganglion cells to send electrical signals off toward the brain. The amacrine and horizontal cells work to modulate the circuit. Okay, we've successfully made it out of the eye, and now it's time to head back toward the brain. Visual information flows along the optic nerve like a river of electricity. At the optic chiasm, the signals split, such that images from the left visual field head to the right brain, and images from the right visual field head to the left brain. After the optic chiasm, the visual signals make a quick stop at the lateral geniculate nucleus, or LGN. The LGN is organized into 6 layers, which all receive extensive feedback control from higher visual areas. From the LGN, the visual signals travel along optic radiations back to the visual cortex. The cortex is where we use the signals that originally came from the eye to construct our visual reality. The billions of neurons in the human brain work to encode and process this information. Information is sent forwards and backwards. See, the beauty of the visual system is that everything we see is affected by our memories and our feelings and what we've seen before. Well, that concludes our journey through the visual system. See you next time.
All right. So the visual system is pretty amazing and miraculous. So basically that's kind of what is the biology of it. And what we do is we're looking at functional vision. We used that word before. And so basically, to define functional vision, we're looking at, for example, visual attention. So how is the child using their vision to notice things around in the world? So we're looking at, when we go see a child in their home, we're looking at how is their functional vision aiding them, or is there anything that's impeding them in how they're accessing and learning through their environment? So we're looking at visual attention. We're looking at visual communication. So how is this child like attending to people? Are they smiling? Are they noticing facial expressions? Are they understanding, is that visual imitation there where they're like watching what others are doing? That's like one of the main ways we learn. So we're looking at that aspect of functional vision. And then we're looking at visual motor coordination. So we're looking at how is the child using their hands and eyes together? How is the child using their feet and eyes together? All that, looking at that fine motor piece of, really that coordination between doing fine motor tasks and their vision. And then the big piece is the visual processing, and that's basically the computer or our brain. How is our brain understanding the visual world. So as you saw in that last video, you know, those electrical impulses are going into the brain and basically being deciphered by the brain, it's all, our vision happens in the brain. So, so basically when we're looking at visual processing, how, this is an example, but how is your child picking up and manipulating objects, showing interest in them? Are they understanding their visual world? They can have visual attention, they can notice things, but do they understand? Do they recognize what they're looking at? So those are kind of the pieces. These 4 areas are taken from an assessment that we use. And I really like how this assessment breaks it up. I think it makes it very clear in terms of what functional vision is. So when we're looking at the typical developmental vision sequence, you know, basically we come into this world pretty, you know, the visual system is ready to go. We're talking about a full-term infant. So even though there's aspects of it that are immature, all the parts are there are ready to receive and learn information from the visual world. And so most infants, you know, you're thinking about a baby who's breastfeeding, you know, they're able to like really focus in on a mom, you know, that's at 2.5 feet. So they're very much nearsighted. So things like further away are going to be blurry. And then that eventually just gets better and better with time. And so basically we're looking at like by the first 6 months of life, more or less, most things are like at adult levels. So it's interesting with acuity in this book that I got this information on, they were saying acuity develops by 6 months. And then like when I was researching online, you know, they were saying that by like preschool age. So obviously there's still some things they're still researching. But for the most part, and Amber, you know, chip in with any of this, but things like acuity, accommodation, you know, that's like being able to focus something as something gets closer to your face, motion detection, things that are moving, color vision, most of those things are pretty solid by 6 months. And then other things are later. So visual fields actually, you know, our adult levels aren't really reached. So visual fields out here aren't really reached until like preschool, school age. They were saying even depth perception can be a little bit later, and contrast sensitivity. So that's like being able to really distinguish the subtleties between, like, say, like the various shades of red or various shades of green, you know. So that contrast sensitivity is being able to detect those subtle differences. And again, this is taken from another assessment tool that we use. Amber, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So this is kind of busy. There's a lot of pictures, but I wanted to capture a couple of different examples of what our services can look like for kids 0 to 3. So, you know, we've got like up here in the corner, we've got this baby, we're talking about tummy time, and you can see the shiny gold thing. So we're trying to figure out what's going to get this child's visual attention, what's going to give them the motivation to work on these different positions and things that maybe other team members might be working on as well. Down here at the bottom, we've actually got Miss Sarah, and she's working with the little one, and it looks like they're pushing on a toy, thinking about mobility. And, you know, that's just kind of one example. And then up here, we've got a little girl who's working with a cane with her mom, using an adult cane together. And this is actually a little girl I worked with, and she has no vision at all. And she took to that cane at the age of 2. So it's just this idea of the earlier we get in there, we really have these opportunities. Here we've got a little guy, he's sitting in what we call a defined play space that his mom set up for him. And it's this idea of creating a space that these kids can map out and figure out, like, I know that my drum is always going to be in this corner, and I know how to eventually start figuring out how to get from one section of this defined play space to another, and it's predictable, and I get to be independent. right? And then here's another example up here in the corner of the same kid, and his mom created this board, a scratch board with all kinds of different tactile opportunities for him to just explore, learn about and experience, and that's getting him ready for Braille in the long run, that tactile discrimination using his fingers. Down here we have another one of my coworkers, and and this picture isn't the greatest, it's a screenshot on a Zoom. I was on Zoom, she's in person, but what he's using is what we call them like Costco desks. So it's made out of a box, and this dad kind of reinforced it and painted it black, so it's like ready to go with to create contrast with things. But here they are working with the iPad and really figuring out this is a device that works well for this child in terms of not only him seeing things and engaging, but the social interaction piece is actually what was the most beautiful part. Some turn taking and things like that. We've got a little one down here activating a toy with a switch. And then here in this corner, we have a kiddo using what we call an AMD to practice standing at this point. And eventually this could support mobility as a pre-cane opportunity. So these are just some examples of what services look like in the home and the community.
So basically when we're looking at red flags, so kind of when you're out and about in the community or your own child and you're like thinking about like, when should I get more information? So these are kind of some things to kind of be on the lookout for. The most obvious is if you already have a diagnosed with a visual impairment, if someone in the community, or your own child has already a visual impairment, we can certainly support that child and the family. If there's any kind of significant medical history, like a syndrome or any kind of brain damage, like I had stated earlier, basically everything visual is processed in the brain. So if there's any kind of brain damage, then there is a likelihood that the visual system could be impaired. Prematurity, just because of the just anything that could happen during that birth, either perinatally. Premature babies can have like brain bleeds or strokes or things like that, just because of their sensitive state, because they're born so early. So that can also lead to some kind of visual impairment. Also, ROP is kind of a common thing with premature babies. And that's where the retina isn't fully developed, ready to be, there's some like abnormal vessel growth. So that's another common thing with premature babies. And then any kind of exposure during pregnancy, so like drug exposure, sometimes moms get CMV, so that's that virus that can really cause issues for the baby in utero. Immediate family history of childhood vision loss. So if there's just like family history of any kind of vision loss, then that can be something that we can follow up with the family or support the family with, and it can be something that we would monitor, for example. So what's nice about NMS-BVI is we have a lot of flexibility in the Birth to 3 program to follow kids who are at risk. So they don't even have to have a vision diagnosis. We can just be there as a support and to monitor and to make sure that the child's reaching their developmental milestones, and if they're not, that it's not because of a vision issue. Appearance of eyes. So, and we'll give some, more concrete examples of some of these things, but appearance of eyes is either that strabismus, the crossing of eyes, and sometimes even there can be like a cloudiness or things like that. Behaviors that are often associated with visual impairment. So that's, again, kind of going into that neurological piece, not always, but sometimes there can be that neurological piece of they're not processing the visual information. And so that can, their eyes can be fine. They can have totally normal like 20/20 vision, but how they're processing visual information is askew, and that needs further assessment essentially.
Sarah, you might go into this, but I was going to mention that any child that's referred to early intervention services as a part of their initial comprehensive multidisciplinary evaluation, they also receive a vision screen where we can identify some of those red flags and then make referrals. So
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a really important thing that Anne was saying. So because we all work so closely together in early intervention, that is happening for every kid. So that's really important to know that this is an opportunity to catch these concerns. So just a real quick overview of some of the appearance of the eyes to be keeping an eye out for, which Sarah touched based on. So absence of the eyes moving together, whether one eye's crossing, drifting off one direction or another, any kind of differences in the eyes, whether it's shape, size, pupils, etc. Jerky eye movements, like noticing that the eyes are jerking just all the time or sometimes, or when they're trying to fixate on something visually. Any kind of excessive tearing or like, too much redness or things like that. Droopy eyelids, that cloudy or milky appearance, which you can actually see in these two images, or a sustained eye turn. And we have some other examples of some of the visual appearances. So here's an example of a ptosis. So it's that droopy eyelid. This may or may not cause visual difficulties, depending on if the pupil is too covered and if the right amount of light can get in for the kid to be able to see what their environment offers. Here's some examples of strabismus. So there's the esotropia, exotropia, and hypertropia, and all that's really referring to is which direction that the eye is drifting in. And then this last one is the pseudostrabismus, and I just think this one's kind of important because it appears as though this little guy's eye might be drifting in, so like an esotropia. However, if you look at the reflections in his pupils, they're actually in the same spot. So that's an indicator that the eye is not drifting. And maybe it's more related to the folds in the eyes or the broader nose, things like that. So sometimes this can become a concern for a family, like it seems like his eyes are crossing or her eyes are crossing. And then really ultimately it's just kind of a pseudo effect. So here we have, again, we can see these reflections up in this top and they're in the same spot. So that's a good sign. And then you see like a larger pupil and a smaller pupil, and maybe the may or may not have a different spot of the reflection. And then again, different sizes. And then on this other side, we have what we call colobomas. So kind of looks like a keyhole or a different shape of the pupil. It's not the normal round. And the coloboma can affect all the way from the pupil and the iris all the way back into the optic nerve and retina and things like that. And it's just that it's developed a little bit differently. So those are some things to look out for with pupils. Or if you're noticing that they're not dilating at the same rate as each other or not dilating at all with light, those can all be concerns. This is just a quick run through of the visual behaviors to look for, and these are actually pulled directly off of that screening tool that Anne mentioned that all early intervention agencies are using. And Sarah was talking about how they could potentially be indicators for neurological concerns. So tilting or holding their head in an unusual position, that can also just be a visual thing if one eye is not quite working the same as the other. Holding objects close or bending to look at something. So noticing that kids are really needing something close to be able to see the details. Looking beside, under, or above, there's a typo, an object or a person. So if you feel like maybe eye contact isn't happening, but when you're talking to a child, they're looking kind of next to you, or they always seem to be looking down or up, those could be concerns. Or even if they're, you're offering them a toy and they're looking away when they're reaching, things like that. Consistent staring at lights or ceiling fans are like really high contrast things after the 2 months of age can be, could be a concern. It's not necessarily, but it could be. visually inattentive or uninterested. So sometimes parents will report that, like, it just seems like they're not interested in their toys, they're not interested in looking at me, or whatever it might be. So, and then other times it's inconsistent. So some moments or some days seems like the kid's totally interested in things, they're able to reach for them, they're wanting to look at the details of their toys. And then other moments, not so much. They're just kind of checked out, or they seem to need visual breaks. Or there's just this concern, like, this seems really inconsistent. Or if we notice a really high sensitivity to room light or sunlight. So most kids will kind of scrunch their eyes, most babies out in the sunlight. But if you feel like it's more extreme than you would expect, that could be a concern. And then again, kind of that idea of difficulty of sustaining eye contact that we're looking for in babies, that interaction.
Oops. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to do that. I went to the next slide.
It's okay. We're good. This is just to kind of paint the picture of a kiddo that does have CVI, that brain-based piece of a visual impairment. And this picture to us kind of captures this, I don't know, how would you describe it, Sarah? Kind of like she's looking at the camera, but there just seems to be something kind of missing. Like it's kind of like almost like a blank stare.
Right.
So it's just that,
yeah,
kind of give you that image of what that might look like. Of course, every kid's going to look really different. And then this image over here, kind of, if we piggyback off of that video we watched, it just helps think about, okay, all the things happening in the brain. Like here's this little bug, this guy's seeing it, it's getting back into the brain. We've got to look at motion, we've got to look at form, we've got to look at depth, we've got to look at color. And when individuals or kiddos have CVI, any or all of these could be challenging or difficult for them in terms of making sense of what they're seeing in their visual environment. So it's just kind of a quick, man, there's a lot happening in the brain. Not only that, but they also have to remember that that's a bug, and you know, all of those pieces in terms of the visual memory and things too. So real quick snapshot of how complicated vision is in the brain.
And what you could kind of say with this little girl, for example, is there's some visual latency. So there's just like a slow response or slow registration to what they're looking at. And the big thing with CVI is that, so you see all these like neural pathways in the brain, and not all of them are working. So there might be damage in the brain. So the brain is having to figure out alternative routes. So it's like if you're driving to Albuquerque and instead of I-25, you have to go through Madrid, and it's a much slower drive. So that's kind of what's happening with this little girl, is it just taking longer for everything to register and connect and make sense. And so that's kind of why in general with these kids with CVI, we just have to slow things down and simplify things. So this is just looking at a pie chart. This is from 2019, I think. I can't see the top of it, but anyway, okay. So this is looking at the students that NMS BVI serves, and kind of a breakdown of what the children, you know, what the diagnosis is. And this is from, so our program from birth to 3 all the way up through the residential school. And so just kind of quickly going through it, I talked about how we see at-risk kids. Nystagmus is kind of the shaking of the eye, so that can cause like blurry vision. So microphthalmia, sorry, I'm not saying that right. Anophthalmia, that is either no eyeball, or a very small eyeball. There's ocular.
The inoculation would be if an eyeball had to be removed. For instance, if a kiddo had like cancer in the eye or something like that. Retinoblastic.
Right, retinoblastic, yeah.
Or damage.
And then, right, thank you. And then there's the ocular motor. So that's just how, if the eye's having a hard time moving following a moving object. So There's maybe there's some jerkiness in how the eye moves, so that there's just some issues with, it's either a neurological issue or there's actually an issue with the eye muscles. And then there's the anterior defects. So that's anything in the front part of the eye. So that's like the cataract, if there's cataract issues, if there's issues with the iris, like you saw those pictures that Amber presented. And then the retinal defect is obviously anything that has to do with the retina. So that could be like the ROP that I talked about with premature babies, where the retina is having, because they're born early, the retina is reacting by producing too many blood vessels, and then there's tears, and that can cause vision issues. Optic nerve hypoplasia is the issue with the nerve going from the back of the eye to the brain. And so that can cause vision issues with that vision information just not getting to the back of the brain. And then you have the neurological vision impairment, which is 23%. So that's our biggest reason, that's the most of the kids that we see have some kind of neurological issue going on. And then vision impairment due to non-accidental trauma, that is like child shaken baby, some kind of, trauma basically. And so unfortunately that 23% and 38% is making up the huge chunk of some kind of neurologically based vision issue. And it's unfortunate here in New Mexico that 38% has jumped. So before it was much less, and in recent years that has gotten more. So
we did go ahead and include these 20 tips to soothe your crying infant. And this is just a kind of a outreach thing in terms of how do we support our communities across our state to try to prevent child abuse, child shaken baby. Who should be referred?
okay.
Any child between the age of birth to 3, and any of those things that we've talked about that can be red flags. If anyone, parents, anyone on the team has any kind of concern, give us a call and we're here to help you sort through that. And then how to make a referral. There's our contact information. You can make self-referral, early intervention agencies can make referral, eye doctors can make referral. So just know that there's options. And then I think also included is going to just be some online resources, and that'll be on the PDF version of the PDF. I mean, of the PowerPoint. I think one of the things too that we can remind families of, and there's different guidance across the state based on what pediatricians or home visitors or whoever might be know, is that kids from the time of birth can go to an ophthalmologist and can get a full assessment. So if there really are concerns, just knowing that that's an option, because sometimes you'll hear things like, oh, you can't go to the eye doctor until you're at least in school or you're 5 and you can do the whole acuity test of saying what you see on the board, right? And it's more than that. It's looking at the health of the eye, especially if there's a family history of concerns.
Work in concert with the early intervention agencies, but we also don't have to. So we have the flexibility to go see a family if they're not involved with early intervention, they don't have any other connections with any other agencies. We're not constrained by the family infant toddler state, New Mexico state. It's basically about billing. So we have more flexibility. We can follow even kids older than 3 if they need some support in transitioning to a preschool. So there's definitely a lot of support that we can provide, and have gratefully been given that freedom from the school to be flexible. So that's really nice. I think for some families who don't quite fall in the right, they don't check all the boxes in terms of getting the right kinds of services sometimes. So they think that they can't get our services, but they can.
And in fact, that partnership goes like often, if we get those referrals, whether it's directly from the doctor, the parent themselves, or another entity, we can then support the family in the referral to the EI agency if that's what's appropriate for the family and that's what they're interested in. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amber and Sarah, for joining us today. It was an awesome presentation. I definitely learned something, and we appreciate you being here with us. So thank you, everybody.
Much, you guys.